Hi there, welcome to No Nonsense Whiskey. My name's Vin PF, and on today's episode we've got something probably a little bit special. This one here is a new Spencer Collings release, and we'll get into that a little bit later, but it's the main thing about this is that it's to celebrate 50 years of Mike Collings being in kind of whiskey. You know, he's had a really long, illustrious career. He's now retired, if you can call it retirement, because he's still putting out whiskey. But Mike's been a long-standing kind of friend of the show. He's been on the show a couple of times. You know, I've covered his whiskies quite a lot, the Firkin whiskies, and a few of the other ones. So yeah, a big fan of his and of what he's doing in his retirement. Now, what we've got here then, as I said, is the Spencer Collings is their brand, other than kind of Firkin. There's a few things there. There's a bottle actually that I have up in Scotland with a good friend of mine, Ben Marnock, not his real name, but he's looking after that for me right now. So when I eventually get to see him properly, we'll have a little proper jam of that, and hopefully I'll get to cover that for you. That's an incredible whiskey. But this guy Mike, he's responsible for things like your Johnny Walker Green Label, which is an astounding whiskey. You know, he obviously worked for Diageo for a long time, and that's meant that he's got access to quite a lot of whiskey that he can kind of faff about with in his retirement. Now, this is one of those things. Now, for Firkin, that was the way that was always going, was to take a whiskey that's been maturing and then pair it with some kind of fortified wine that's been rolled around in their custom-built casks, which is like, I think it's like American oak and French oak that's been disassembled and put together, which is all, you know, very expensive, a way of doing whiskey, but every single one of their Firkins that I've tried, I've really enjoyed. Here we have a Mannochmore, stated as 2011, a single cask, which is a custom-built Muscat cask, which in my very limited research is some kind of Australian wine, but I'm not going to pretend to know exactly what that is or what that's doing. I know that Mike lives over there right now, so maybe that's where that link has come from. But I did try to do a little bit of knowledge building before that, but yeah, it's an interesting way of doing things. I've never tried a whiskey quite like this, is the truth. Now, it's huge ABV, it's 59.6. It sells for about 85 quid, so it's not a cheap whiskey by any stretch. But let's get into the actual review and we'll see what I think of it. Natural coloured, non-chill filtered, cask strength, all those wonderful things. But look at that deep ass colour, my God. It's like a dark mahogany. On the nose then. Now this, one thing I like to do with whiskies is try to imagine, if at all possible, what it would be like to try this as a blind tasting if I didn't know anything about the whiskey itself. And the one thing I do try to look at is ABV. On the nose, it doesn't rear its head as an extremely high ABV. Maybe that's my nose getting used to it, but I quite like that. It's very sweet, it's lots of honeys, butterscotch. I'm getting kind of like golden syrup on this. And on the back end, I'm getting dates and figs, which is unusual for me. Like when I'm talking about kind of typical sherried whiskies, you end up talking about like rays and sultanas, but this is very clearly on that rich dates and figs end of the spectrum. Let's try on the palate. Okay, right, there's a lot to unpick here. Now, first initial mouthfeel, very thick, very viscous, very oily, really nice, just like coats over. Now, here's an interesting thing. Now, when I talk about high ABV a lot, I'm well used to it now, but high ABV lets itself be known usually very early. You get a couple of split seconds to try some whiskey before the ABV wafts over and you get all that extra flavour that comes with it. This one is a little bit different. I mean, I've had about half of this now. It's been sat out on the side, maybe that's helped, but you get that initial lovely mouth coat, then all of the sweetness from the nose translates over those honeys, those butterscotch, that syrup, and you get seemingly loads of time to assess that before the ABV comes in. I'm talking actual seconds instead of milliseconds, which is, you know, very atypical. You know, I haven't tried a whiskey that's done that in probably a long time. After the ABVs hit, that's when kind of it turns itself on its head a little bit, and I'm getting kind of like orange and clove. I mean, dare I say, it's kind of a little bit Christmassy, which is pretty good. I like that sort of thing. For me, the finish is huge. It's long, it's a little bit spicy, but it's more those kind of orange and cloves once everything else has disappeared. That's what you're kind of left with on the back end. Now, A couple of things to note on this. Now, as I've said a couple of times now, this is unlike any whiskey I've tried before, which is really good, and it's certainly better than any Mannochmore whiskey I've ever tried, which is, again, fairly limited, but it's superb. That kind of Muscat influence on this, again, I don't think I've ever tried a Muscat, so I don't know exactly how that's influencing it, but whatever it's doing, it's working. It's mingled in perfectly with this. I don't know the exact age on this. We know it was distilled in 2011, so it's probably going to be 10 to 13 years old, probably, considering it was initially labelled up and bottled in 2023. Don't know what it was doing between those. So yeah, we're going to say roughly sort of 10 to 12 years probably, which is more than enough time. I think that, I have to say, going by the firkins, which are about £75 right now, which again, it feels expensive, but having tried loads of them, I tell you, it's a snippet. This being just a 10 or more actually presents quite good value for this whiskey. I'm not saying that everyone's going to be able to afford this or be able to run out and get it, but I think what they're doing with their interesting cask types and their kind of their influences on the other wines that go into it, it's pretty much unlike any other whiskey brand that I've ever encountered. Might be happening elsewhere, but as far as I know, it's not, and that's what makes them interesting, and that's what commands that extra price, I think, because it's an extra few steps that other people aren't doing because it costs so much to do that, and that obviously is reflected in the final bottle cost. Anyway, I don't think I can enthuse about this much more because it's just fantastic. I'm going to be hopefully sharing this with people when I get the opportunity to, because it would be quite remiss of me to keep this to myself. I think it's one of those whiskies where, you know, it's not going to sit there and kind of appreciate in price as it goes on. I don't think this is one of those ones where you've got to buy it, share it with friends. It'd be a special dram for you maybe, and get it out on special occasions. Like I said, it's a little bit Christmassy as well, a bit autumnal, so it might be worth saving until that point in time. But yeah, again, if you want to go and check this out, you can go and check out the link to TopWhiskies below, who are selling this in the UK. Again, no affiliate links whatsoever, so you know there's no kind of incentive for that, but make sure you do go and check it out, because I think this is one of those standout ones that won't be repeated. I think there's like 253 bottles of this in existence, so when it's gone, it's gone. There you go. As I normally say on the back end of these videos, I'm going to enjoy this off screen, but I'll see you again on more videos soon. Cheers.